Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and today I wanted to talk about Everdell Emerald. Not just Everdell Emerald, mind you, but this video is certainly inspired by Everdell Emerald, although it's a problem that has existed in a lot of games. I would say most famously probably Zombicide, but Everdell seems to be going that route. I just finished reviewing this game. You can check out that video. I gave it a 5 out of 5. It was also my most half-hearted 5 out of 5 that I have ever given. I'm pretty sure. I have to look through it. There's a few other potential contenders, but I'm pretty sure this is the most half-hearted 5 out of 5 I ever gave. And that's not a reflection of the quality of the game. The game is great. It's Everdell with a new fresh coat of paint, some new mechanics, and it's a lot of fun. It's a good implementation of Everdell. I think it's excellent. I enjoy it. I will happily play it again. I also can't keep up with all the Everdells. They keep coming out with a new Everdell. At this point, it seems like yearly, and I think part of the problem is that for a long time, Everdell didn't have that problem. So to a certain extent, something like Zombicide, which definitely has had, and with Zombicide Squid Game now, continues to have this problem of continuously putting out new Zombicides again and again and again. Zombicide almost always had this problem, or at least perceptually, and maybe it's a reflection of my own taste of when I got into the board game space, but Zombicide has always had this issue. Everdell didn't. Once upon a time, it was Everdell. Then it was expansions. Expansions are a totally different category. We'll come back to that as well. And then from there, it was like suddenly, hey, by the way, we have a new Everdell, because we told you that Everdell is done. We announced and we told you. This doesn't help either, by the way. We told you that Everdell is done, it's complete, it's over. But that's base Everdell. We have more Everdell for you. We have My Little Everdell, we have Everdell Farshore, we have Everdell Silverfrost, and now we have Everdell Emerald. But Everdell is done. Just base Everdell is done. So I think the completion of Everdell, followed by hardly being complete, definitely didn't help that perception as well. There's a lot of other small things, but don't get me wrong, I'm going to be very, very fair here and very, very clear. I think Zombicide has the same problem as Everdell. I think Everdell might have some reasons why it feels a bit different, even though it's exactly the same. So I wanted to kind of talk about the nature of these continued editions of a game, when publishers dip into the same thing again and again, when it is a problem for the consumer, when it's not. And to be very clear, you could always choose not to buy things. That doesn't excuse the publisher's choices and how that influences the emotional connection someone has to something. Every choice anyone makes has a ripple effect. And if your choice has an effect on two people, that's just those two people. But if you have a lot of people who feel the same way about something, it does reflect on that choice. This is a problem we've seen with Everdell. It's a problem we've seen with Zombicide. I know I mixed up my hands as I did that. It's a problem we've seen with Finspan and Wingspan and Wormspan and all the various spans. It's a problem we see in a lot of games, and we're going to talk about the issue. Yearly releases of a popular game makes sense to an extent. Or I should be more specific. Diving into something that is well-loved makes sense for a publisher. It is hard to be a publisher in the board game space. It is very, very hard. I am sympathetic even to the largest publishers, because we've seen time and time again that the largest publishers are far from immune to having various issues. The largest publishers still have to play a game of putting out things on a regular, consistent basis to appeal to audience demand, to ensure that the people that they're paying, like, the employees, continuously get paid, to try to grow companies, because that makes sense to do so. But then you have to put out things that are continuously popular, and sometimes new things on a regular basis works. Other times it helps to dip into that pot of something that people love. For every game that Awakened Realms puts out, Nemesis Retaliation, beat it out of the water a million times fold, sometimes diving into the thing that people love. There's a reason you have to engage with that as a publisher. Putting out consistent, well-loved content makes sense. How you do that does matter. Because there's a lot of ways that you can do it, and the problem with crowdfunding is crowdfunding makes this worse than you might see in other industries. The problem with crowdfunding is you sit here and you back Everdell Emerald. You back Everdell Emerald. You now feel emotionally connected to the game. It's your game. A year later, you finally get it. And then, 6 months later, the new one is announced. Which means there's this weird perception where you feel like you've had this game for a year and a half, but you haven't actually had it for a year. And by the time you finally get it is when they announce the next thing. And there's so little time to enjoy the thing that you actually got before you have to deal with the emotional pull of the next thing of that thing you love. The nature of crowdfunding inherently makes the problem a little worse. And so do standalone games versus expansions, and so do standalone games that are effectively small minutiae different than the original game. Because there's several things you can do here. You can put out a standalone game like Everdell Emelin, like Everdell Silverfrost, like Everdell Farshore. You can absolutely do that. You can also put out expansion content, which generally feels more well received because expansion content doesn't feel like a replacement to a game. You still end up with these problems of like, do I want to buy expansion content for a game I've had 2 months and haven't had a chance to play yet? Do I feel pulled in enough that I want to further invest into the game I haven't even played? So you still have these problems. But that's a problem of diving in further. It's not a problem of feeling replaced. Like, I only have so much time to play Everdell. Do I play Everdell Emelin, or do I play the new Everdell that just announced on crowdfunding, and I have to make a decision as to whether to get that today? So standalone games, I think, make the problem worse. And standalone when it's similar, when it feels like you're picking one or the other. Because I love Everdell, I'm a huge fan of the series, and yet if I play Everdell, or Farshore, or Silverfrost, or Emelin, it feels like I'm just picking different flavors of ice cream for the day. As opposed to if they ever come out with an Everdell Legacy or whatnot, that would feel like a totally different experience. Or even Everdell Roll and Write feels like a different experience. Diving into an IP, or Everdell 2 players, because Everdell Duo, they have Everdell Duos, but I said Everdell Duos if they don't have that, they have that already. Diving into an offshoot game that feels different enough often doesn't feel as much like a replacement. And so I think for a publisher to try to capitalize on the success of an existing IP, I think the best way to do so is to space out similar replacement games as much as possible. I think yearly is not a good way to do it, because the nature of crowdfunding means that yearly basically feels like you get it and immediately there's a new one announced. That's not true in traditional retail. When you buy the iPhone 10 and the iPhone 11 and the iPhone 12 and the iPhone 13, you didn't buy it a year in advance, have to wait a year to get it, and then when you get it, you immediately have to choose to buy the next one, which you won't get for a year. That overlapping period of delay that crowdfunding provides makes that resentment over a replacement feel more time sensitive. Even though technically speaking, you still have to wait a year for the next one, so you won't get that then. You won't get it right away anyway. So when you buy the iPhone 11, if you bought it a year in advance, and this shows up a year later, you have to decide to buy the iPhone 12, technically you still have a year to enjoy the iPhone 11 before it gets replaced, but nonetheless, that feeling of it being yours for a year is gone. It feels like you got it, and it's immediately replaced. It also is different. Like, people do compare this to iPhones or whatever it is. Our replacement phone comes out every year. It is different when you're talking about a single-use product versus something that's not meant to be that way. By single-use, I'm saying that poorly. An iPhone or any phone is meant to be something that you have one phone. You just have, there we go. You have one phone. You only really meant to have one phone. And so when a new phone comes out, it does feel like it's meant to be a direct replacement, which also means it's easier to ignore middle versions when you don't want to upgrade. Some people buy an iPhone 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Other people buy a 10, then they buy a 13, a 16. They skip various iterations because you're only ever going to have one. What's the point in having more than one? Games are different. Games provide more of a pull on us because very few of us have one game. We all have lots of games. And so it does feel like you could have Everdell Silverfrost, and you could have Everdell Emelin, and you could have them both, and you could play them both. But that's a feeling it's a feeling that you could, but then when push comes to shove and you have them both, they are kind of taking up the same spot when they are as similar as they are. And again, this is a problem that's very, very present with Zombicide and with other games as well. We'll talk about some examples because I do think we'll talk about some examples soon. So I think that the problem of crowdfunding makes things worse. I think the nature of a similar game as opposed to Everdell Legacy, Everdell Duo, Everdell Roll and Write, I think those change that as well. Or Everdell expansions, those all make the problem more palatable as well. And I say all this because I think that companies should dive into existing IPs that are popular. I think Awakened Realms should have Nemesis Retaliation, but they also had 3 Nemesis games across how many years? When was the first one come out? I don't even remember, but like they had 3 over not 3 years. It was a much longer span than that. I think the shortness of the span matters. This is a problem we saw with Finspan, with Wingspan, and with Wormspan. First, we had Wingspan. Then, many years later, we had Wormspan. And then a year later, we had Finspan. And that's when people lost their minds. Wormspan really didn't bother anyone, or at least a minimal portion of the audience. But then a year later with Finspan, just felt like that timing aspect. You're like, come on, I just got Wormspan. I just got another version of the game you got, and now you're immediately telling me about the third version? Like, what's next? And that started all the memes. I think that in general, the tightness of the time period does matter when you're leaning into an existing IP, but I do want companies to be successful. And we also have to remember for ourselves that as much as for me, Everdell Emelin might be my 4th Everdell, for somebody else, It might be their first Everdell. They've seen Everdell, they've heard about Everdell, but they haven't gotten into it yet. They got into the board game space 2 years ago, they got into it when Silverfrost was coming out, they didn't get that because whatever, they've heard good things, and now Everdell Emelin with gorgeous art and cute critters comes out. This might be their first Everdell. Companies should build and capitalize on existing IPs, both to appeal to their base that wants more of it, to appeal to those that might want 1 or 2 Everdells but not all, to appeal to those that want every single Everdell, and to appeal to those who are new to the board game space, and it's a new opportunity to remind them, hey, look at this game, this is a cool new thing that just came out. It's not like a game from 5 years ago that you might not be interested in, it's a game that just came out right now, and this might be good for you. So I think that companies should lean into existing IPs. I just think they have to be mindful that the way they do so can run the risk of burning out their audience. Again, I am a huge fan of Everdell. I like Emerald. I love Emerald. I gave it a 5 out of 5, but it's the most half-hearted 5 out of 5 I gave because it feels like I'm reviewing small, iterative versions of the same game every single time I dive back into it. And my excitement for Farshore, I had skepticism over Farshore, and then I loved it. I had less skepticism over Silverfrost, but I was like, okay, this is number 3, that's fine. And then with number 4, it's like, okay, are you going to be different enough that I'm invested in that difference? And it is a little bit more different, to be clear. You can check out my review for that, but it still feels like it's building on the same core structure, the same thing that Zombicide did for years. There's a lot of other games that have done this in different ways. Zombicide for me was also a game system that had this problem. It's probably the most similar to Everdell, because there are other games out there that have done similar things. I mentioned Wingspan, Wormspan, and Finspan already. There's the entire DC United line. That one I feel differently about. Marvel United, DC United. I feel slightly differently about that because as much as each one is a standalone, you can integrate all of it so ridiculously easy that it just as much feels like an expansion as opposed to a new game that I have to pick and choose. Now, make no mistake, the amount of United content does mean like it's a little crazy, but I could integrate pick and pull. I don't have to feel like I'm choosing one or the other. It all goes together nicely. Zombicide sometimes has that interchangeability, but more often than not, Zombicide is probably the most similar version of this problem for me, where whenever a new Zombicide came out, I was like, I will get you, and then I'll play you, and then I'll see if I like you, and if I like you more than another one, or we'll replace another one, and if not, I'll get rid of you and sell you and get my money back. Having CMON with their campaigns, and their campaigns that held their value, and obviously current drama and potential not getting your games aside, but having games that held their value made a huge difference in the fact that I was willing to dive into a new Zombicide, get all these cool miniatures, be excited about the process, be excited about the campaign, be excited about unboxing it all and seeing the cool miniatures, be excited about playing it, and then once I played it, I make a decision. Zombicide 2nd Edition, wasn't for me. Very excited about it, but not for me. Zombicide Wild West, I was honestly a little skeptical, but then it was really, really good. Whatever, it's Undead or Alive, Zombicide Undead or Alive, the Wild West one. I was a little bit skeptical about it, but then I dove into it, I was like, wow, this is really good. And then that was replaced immediately by having the fact that the Marvel Zombies was better. It was all the difficulty I wanted from Undead or Alive, but with a new structure and a system, and that allowed me to get rid of Undead or Alive. I always viewed Zombicide as a system where I allowed myself to have 2 or 3 of them, and I just kept the best 2 or 3 while allowing myself to go through it. But again, it is certainly the closest to Everdell in terms of that problem. I think Everdell Emerald, or Everdell as a series, I think I will always be happy to try the newest Everdell. I will always be excited to try a system that has continuously given me good games with tweaks and changes. But like Zombicide, I'm at the point where I'm now going to be picking the 2 that I actually care about. And I say 2, I'm not yet sure if it's going to be 2, because the problem I have is I really like Emerald. And I like Emerald enough that it's easy for me, I think, to get rid of Silverfrost and not keep that one. But I also like Farshore enough that maybe I do want to keep Farshore. And I do like the fact that I have a small standalone box of Everdell and then a big giant collection when I want to go all into a full-on expansion gameplay. I like that, the fact that I have that choice. So I don't yet know if it'll be 2 or 3 Everdells, but I don't think I will ever keep 4 Everdells. And again, offshoot, Everdell Legacy and Everdell Roll are a different conversation. But these aren't games that exist, to be clear, but I'm saying if they make games like that. I think what we can do as a consumer. Oh, and the last thing I'll say, by the way, things like Dominion, Ascension, Aeon's End, those types of things where they lean into a game again and again, even though they're standalone, because like DC United, they're all integratable, I think they are different. I think this problem is most noticeable when you have standalone systems that aren't integratable, that keep coming out on a yearly basis with small tweaks to the formula. I think that is the main time I see that problem. And that problem has almost exclusively been Zombicide and Everdell, at least to my awareness. And then Finspan, sort of, because the timing of Finspan and Wormspan, but even that I think is an exception. I don't think that's the normal way things are going to be done with Stonemaier. What you can do as a consumer is a few things. First of all, don't treat the series like you have to have everything. Like, don't. You'll burn yourself out on that. You can't have every single version of Zombicide. You can't have every single version of Everdell. Honestly, don't back them on crowdfunding. I think that when you have yearly releases of the same game, I think that the fact that you emotionally invest in it now, and then when you get it, you only have a few months before you find out the newest one's coming out, I think that that makes it more, it burns you out on the experience more. By the way, obviously, everything if I'm saying, only do this stuff if it resonates with you. If you're like, nope, I back Everdell, I get Everdell, I'm happy with Everdell, awesome, amazing. You're happy, the publisher's happy, everyone's happy, that's great. I'm only talking to those of you who are like myself, feeling a little burnt out on something you love. Don't treat it like you have to have everything. Don't back it on crowdfunding because it emotionally connects you before you can even play it, and then you immediately find out the next one's there before you even have a chance to do anything about it. Honestly, wait until you even try it to see if it's better than the ones you have and worth getting. Gaming conventions are great for this. That guy in your collection who backs everything is great for this. Game cafes are great for that. There's a lot of ways you can try a game that you don't have, and especially if it's a small iteration on a version you already have, maybe that's a good time to go ahead and wait, try it, and only then decide, do you actually like this more than Silver Frost, or is it basically potato and you're happy with what you have? And lastly, and I would argue just as importantly as everything else, don't begrudge the companies making them. I think feedback is important. I think choosing not to buy things that you don't think are worth it to you is important. But I think that sometimes there's a degree of resentment, of resentment towards companies making things on a regular basis. You've seen this with Simon to no end. You saw it with Stonemaier Games. You see it with Everdell Tycoon Games. You see the accusations of cash grab, of milking your audience, of all of those things. I think companies have to lean into their evergreens. I think they have to. I think companies only survive because they have a few evergreens and they keep making other games hoping for the next evergreen so that they can have 2 or maybe 3 evergreens as opposed to just 1. Evergreen products, evergreen IPs are how companies stay alive in an incredibly crowded space. Don't begrudge the companies making things that lean into their IPs that have been incredibly successful. Don't feel the need to buy it either, but operate with an understanding that they aren't just catering to you, they're catering to people who want it all and are happy with it. They're catering to new gamers, and they're constantly trying to offer something new and innovative while leaning into the familiar at the same time. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.